Welcome to Nerd, a podcast where we geek out on a different nerdy subject every month. It's one part reminiscence, one part historical deep dive, all nerd. This month's topic, Mega Man 2. In the year 2000X, Dr. Light created sentient robots to help humanity, but his former assistant Dr. Wily reprogrammed them for evil. Dr. Light's brave helper robot Mega Man agreed to be repurposed as a fighting robot and defeated Dr. Wily. In 2000X, Dr. Wily has returned, this time with 8 of his own robot creations. Mega Man has once again agreed to return and keep Dr. Wily from taking over the world. In 2022, two nerds decided to discuss the game's origin, super fascinating code behind it, and a little bit more about the story. Let's get equipped with Weapon Nerd and start the show.
What's up, nerds? Hey, welcome to a new episode of Nerd with Dre and Jeff. I'm Jeff. I'm the second part of that. That would mean you are.
How's it going, Jeff? Normally you've actually done the full intro, so put me on the spot here, but I'm Dre Alvarez, found most places as Nerd Numbers.
That's right. So you got to mix it up sometimes. We are doing, this is part 3 of our fan favorite show podcast that we are doing, Nerd, and we are doing a deep dive into all things nerdy, usually so far that we grew up with and generally that we played on Nintendo, and this is no break on this. We are going to be doing a deep dive today on Mega Man 2. We are nailed the sequels so far.
Oh yeah, it's funny. I mean, technically I guess Punch-Out would have been the third in a trilogy, but really Punch-Out 1 and Punch-Out 2 in the arcade were kind of the same game. One was kind of the skin of the other. We, of course, started with Zelda 2, Mega Man 2. I'd kind of call this the end of Season 1, if you want to call that, of Nerd. We'll end out the Nintendo, and we'll discuss where we go next, maybe at the end of the show. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see about that. I'm very excited to see what happens at this situation, and I'm looking forward to it. This is a lot of fun. I love learning about this. Mega Man is an interesting story to me. It's actually a game that I never really owned. I never really owned Mega Man games until I traded for a few of the later ones. We just always rented them.
I mean, that's strictly speaking not a problem. We may talk speedrunning in the future of this show, depending on how much we go down that rabbit hole. But you know, the games take about an hour and a half if you know what you're doing. I could see being able to beat this in 1 or 2 rentals. Interestingly enough, if we talk the first 3 games, and that's pretty much what we're going to be doing, you know, Mega Man 2, but that's really going to bleed a lot into Mega Man 1 and Mega Man 3. Mm-hmm. They really were incomplete games, which is kind of funny. So I could definitely buy 4 is really kind of the first complete polished one. And I just got done with 6. 6 is like perfect, but it took them 5 tries to get there. And that's also amusing. This really does bookend off of last show, which was Punch-Out, in that you said Punch-Out is this phenomenally successful game, amazingly well produced. You know, it has the higher ups of Nintendo. It's thought out. They partner with Mike Tyson. I forget the boxer that they had at the arcade rollout, but another big name boxer. Everything perfect, and it culminates in success. You know, sells 3 million copies, and then they're like, and we're done. Like, why?
And we're out.
They're like, we'll reskin the arcade game on the Super Nintendo, and someone will take it up as a fun project for the Wii, but as a franchise, they just ditched it. Mega Man was released, Mega Man 1, and they were hoping it would be a success. It did decently well in Japan, from what I've read up on. It gets to North America. We're going to talk a ton on this, I'm sure, Jeff. Gets to North America and bombs, and they're like, we are out. And the team behind it was like, we want to keep going. And so not only do they keep going, they released 6 on the original NES, which that's unheard of. Like,
it's the little charge man that could.
Exactly.
So
but it is also
could, you see.
Yeah, I got it.
You see,
it was good. It wasn't like
charge man is
not to be
but
mean, but like that was good. But I didn't think it was like a joke.
The little charge man that could, you see, because it's like a little engine that could, and charge man is a train.
Yeah, it worked. But I'm saying it was a good reference. I didn't.
I
you wanted to pop.
Like it didn't really.
So I do the editing on the shows. Do you want me to add like the canned laughter?
I think it would be
sports night this up. Just add laughter after everything.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There needs to be. People don't know we do record this in front of a live studio audience. It's just none of them find this interesting or funny.
I wish I was a better editor. I'm damn, I'm debating if I'm going to add that in now in post. Anyway, like one, not the whole show. It's fun, one joke. So like I could add that in and then cut this part out. I'm giving future me work. I don't know what I'm doing, and we're not talking about Mega
I like it because I don't have to do any of that work.
All right,
but yeah, so you were saying it's like it's this thing that kind of flopped in America. It's one of those games. It brought with it very Japanese anime energy. It's clearly an Astro Boy analogy.
They say that explicitly.
Yeah. And it's like, yeah, like old man makes robot warrior boy, and like they pushed it through, and they were right to be like, well, look, we know that America wants it, just you need to let us push through it. And since then we've seen, the Mega Man franchise has been this omnipresent franchise in not just gaming, but the toys and the cartoon. Did you watch the cartoon when you were younger?
I didn't. I mean, we talked Captain N, and actually, I want to throw back here a little bit. So we talked Captain N, which Mega Man is on. The toy galaxy on that is fantastic. I put it in the show notes for last week's show. Definitely watch it. You were spot on. But the color scheme of Mega Man in that show was different.
Green, right?
But the reason Mega Man is blue on the Nintendo, and this is an amazing amount of foresight. I'm probably going to butcher the name. But Keiji Inafune, who is both the kind of the original designer of Mega Man 1 and the big name that kept carrying it through, the one that thought it had potential and kept going, he looked at the Nintendo, not Super Nintendo. He looked at the Nintendo color scheme and noticed that of the different colors, there were the most different shades of blue. And so he said, as a designer, if I want to design a character and, add little features and extra, I want the color with the most shades because then it can look different, right? It's not different colors. Mario, I've heard maybe apocryphally, has a mustache just because he's a little block and they want to be able to show the face. And that was the fewest number of pixels to easily show a face because you can't really draw, a smiley face, a mouth, but you can draw a mustache to show distinction. So it was a lot of foresight to say, I'm going to use blue as my character's main color because then I can highly detail them. The Mega Man sprites are beautiful. And so, but when you go to a larger color palette, an animated show, they're like, we're not constrained by blue. That's why they can make them, multicolored visor, etc.
And yet, so we had Captain N in what, 1991? Is that when it came out, or 19?
Sounds right.
Yeah. And then in 1994 to 1996, we had a Mega Man TV series, a cartoon, and it was very fun. I liked it a lot. It was very American anime style, and it lasted 2 seasons, I think. And I remember it was like a Sunday morning, one of those cartoons where it wasn't mainstream. It was definitely a syndicated cartoon, but it was just, I really liked it as a kid. I was right about to be 13, so I was like 13, 14 years old when it came out, and a little nerd. That's all I needed.
We were talking Nintendo last show, and just in general, this falls underneath it, where the idea of being a video game was a bad word thanks to Atari at this point. And so you talked about how Mega Man looks very anime-ish, Astro Boy, and one of the most notorious parts of this game is both on Mega Man 1 and Mega Man 2, the box art is, I'll say, unforgivable on 1. On 2, it's fine. On Mega Man 2, I would say it's a cool box art, but it's not the game.
It's a generic misunderstanding of the character. I would say for 2, because he's still got the pistol in his hand, and it's just very generic, not particularly strong if you're trying to advertise a game that could make you $100 million.
Because if you look at the box art that's in Japan for both for all of the game, 1 through 6 is gorgeous, beautiful. I would pick that up off the shelf at this point to at least take a look at it. Wouldn't buy it, don't have time, but would do that. You look at the transitions. Mega Man 1, the story behind that box transition is the guy was given 6 hours, very little information, and essentially told kind of some brief overviews. So again, same thing.
6 hours?
That's at least on the Wikipedia and the Gaming Historian. Big shout out to the Gaming Historian, one of the ones that I always go to for research on this. But on that, they both mention that essentially Mega Man's going to come over. Mega Man's originally Rockman. I'll talk a little bit more about that because I think it's awesome. So Mega Man's going to come over. they're like, okay, well, what do we got to do to bring this to the American audience? One of the things they do is they go, well, we can't call him Rockman. What does that mean? Mega Man instead. And this is one of those where you read the interviews and the person says, Rockman was a stupid idea. I said Mega Man and they liked it. And I'm like, that wasn't a good, I refuse to believe that had we brought over Mega Man as Rockman, that we wouldn't still have Rockman.
I'm not going to lie. Mega Man. The other part though is that Mega Man has alliteration.
Yeah, that's
which
true.
is very catchy. You know, like American mouthfeel and Japanese mouthfeel are going to be different for obvious reasons. So, you know, if you have something that in the American version of how you would say it has that alliteration, I think it's going to pop a little bit more. I don't think they're wrong about that.
Okay, so we'll give them that. But they also went.
I'm also not like I'm not the person who's laying down like the law of that. I mean, I'm just saying that I know you have the theory that it would have been fine, and I'm like, it might not have.
Yeah, but it's true, and I mean that, by the way, is very comic booky. I know that was a Stan Lee thing. He really liked alliteration.
Yes, of course, I invented Mega Man myself in 1985. I was just me. I was programming Mega Man for Marvel Entertainment.
Okay, we're going to go down this just briefly. Sorry. Obviously, in later interviews, Stan Lee is very complimentary of Steve Ditko. Am I getting the name right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, okay. So cool. You're going to answer my question here. But that was the thing, is that in old school Marvel. Sorry, we're getting on a Marvel.
We can talk about it. Yeah, the show's called Nerd. If you want to talk about Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, by all means, go for it.
But so Stan Lee was an old school publisher, editor, and the beauty of his genius, that he might call it, thank you, that he might say, is he would give the ideas to people and they would go with it. And, you know, this is so American to be like, I'm the ideas man. And then at the end, you're like, my ideas are why everything succeeded. And you ignore all the hard work that went into it. Because if you tell
Steve Jobs aspect of it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, if you're talking Steve Jobs versus Wozniak, I give way more credit to Wozniak, but
well, because Steve Jobs would be like, I want to make my computer into a phone. And then he's like, see, I invented the iPhone. And that's the kind of thing where, like, with Stan Lee, he's like, I've got an idea for a man named Spider-Man. Go. And then somebody else had to actually create the character. And then half the time draw and write the scripts because of how the Marvel method works.
Well, I know his comment was he would give a brief overview of the scene. So Stan would say, hey, Spider-Man's fighting the lizard here and he falls off a building. But then they would draw it and he would say, you just leave it blank and I'll fill in the bubbles. But to what you're saying, that is asking that you've given them a broad overview. You are asking them to write the story. And it is probably much easier, especially when you're talking very comic booky, wow, zam, whatever, you know, it's not hard to add the dialogue into a finished scene. So agreed.
It is one of those things where, yeah, like, and then it was like only like later where Stan Lee would be like, well, of course I consider Steve Ditko a co-creator of Spider-Man. And Steve would be like, yeah, why are you even saying that? Like, I practically created most of the character.
And that was the question, as I came in maybe, you know, post Kevin Smith, where, you know, Stan Lee had really revamped his image a lot there, you know, with the introduction of Mallrats, I would say the second era of Stan Lee came about. So I wasn't as familiar with him, with what he said in interviews before that. So he was also much more complimentary.
He was also a spokesperson for Marvel. Yeah. You know, he would be the one that would be introducing, you know, whatever cartoon. Oh, welcome to another episode of the Fantastic Four. And it's like, yeah, you mean the group that Jack Kirby mostly invented alongside with you? Cool. But I digress. I was sorry. Sorry for throwing my comic book shade into our video.
I knew what I was getting into. I was like, if I approach this, you know, it's a huge camp. I wanted.
If this is a port essentially of Astro Boy, it's a knockoff of Astro Boy.
But so part of it was the Stan Lee, let's make his name alliteration, MM.
Yeah.
The other notorious thing is the box art. It was transformed, and like we're agreeing, probably from, we don't want this to look like a video game or a kid's thing. We want to look like something for an adult. And in doing so, produce the worst box art of all time. Mega Man 1 is notorious for that. I think you'd be hard pressed to find anybody that would both say not a horrible piece of box art and also a horrible transition, right?
It does stand to wit, though, that there's this appreciation for ugly art that I think is really fun, where like I looked at that Mega Man thing now and I was like, I look at it now and I'm like, oh, this is kind of fucking awesome because it looks so weird and wrong and bad that it flashes past the like so bad it's bad thing, and you're kind of like, oh, I like how fucking ugly this is. And I kind of,
which isn't horrible if you're trying to sell an expensive cell to an adult collector.
correct.
Probably not a great thing if you're trying to sell a video game to a young kid that's trying to convince their parent to lay down $60.
Oh, the Mega Man cover doesn't belong on Mega Man, but it does belong on my wall. Like,
oh, that is a perfect description of it. So anyway, Mega Man tanks, I would say in part because of that. There were also some parts of the game that were really difficult. In the notes you wrote up, Mega Man 1 is fucking impossible. There is a funny aspect of the game where there is a hidden item that is required to beat the game.
mm-hmm.
It is the most bizarre thing because you basically make a magnetic beam that you are able to walk across, make a big thing across. It doesn't make a ton of sense. I guess it's Magneto powers logic.
Magna beam, yeah.
But it looks really weird. It's very confusing. It's not intuitive that you have to find it. I think it is in the instruction manual somewhere that it's mentioned, but it is possible to get to the very end of the game and not be able to beat it. And it's just you have no choice but to start over. And it's not really, there's no information given to you. It's not like you forgot the magnet beam.
You just have to rage quit Mega Man.
And so those kind of things made it less popular in the US, but the team thought it was worthwhile. And this is where Mega Man 2 gets interesting. They were told, okay, you want to make Mega Man 2? You make Mega Man 2, but you do it on your spare time. You keep developing normal games. So this was a passion project, which is remarkable.
I think it's clear that they knew what they had. And it's one of those things too, where they had, I would say, I'm not gonna sort of bury anything here and saying it was one of the best looking games that Nintendo had, like kind of by a lot.
It says a ton that essentially the engine for Mega Man 1 with some minor improvements, which is also part of the issues that we'll get to in a second about code glitches. But the engine that Mega Man 1 had lasted through 6. They were able to take the engine that they had made for 1 and with some minor improvements able to make 6 games. And that says a ton because there are classic games where it's kind of like the code build gets out, there are breaks in it, and you're just like, leave it alone, never come back to this. So the designs, the game engine.
Look at how different the Mario games are in order. Now, obviously, Mario 2 is not a Mario game, but like when you look at Super Mario Brothers, Super Mario 2, and Super Mario 3, those are vastly different play aspects, even though they're the same concept. And Mega Man, you're right, it sticks with it.
It is the same game through 6, and something that they do really well, which is impressive, and we'll talk about it in 2, is they do minor upgrades each game so that you feel like you're getting a new game. And 3, I would say, is really the only failure. We might talk a little bit there. And by the way, funny note, I'll give a shout out to your other podcast, Jeff Has Cool Friends, your recent one with David Igo. I hope I got the name right. Yeah. You were talking about you and your brothers working at Foot Locker and how the sales would go up when you were just allowed to do your own thing.
Yeah.
And I would say you're saying the same thing about Mega Man 2, is that when the corporate overlords were saying, we want the box art to look like this, we want to sell this many copies, whatever, they went, just let us do it. And when they were allowed to do it in less time, they were able to produce an amazing game.
When you let creatives be creative, you get that, you get the good stuff. When you pull the oversight away from it.
I will give a funny argument that I think you might agree with, though I point to you a little, is that I think the one thing that is useful to creatives a little is deadlines. And I don't think like smacking down, but I think the reason deadlines are useful is, the metaphor, the line is, perfect is the enemy of great. Yeah. And so if you're trying to just keep perfecting something, it's like eventually you just have to ship it. And so I think in some ways, deadlines do help people just go, here's what I need to get done and get it out. And so in some ways that was, I think Mega Man 2 somehow just found that perfect like window, because it's really hard. Sometimes you give deadlines that are too harsh and that blows everything up, or you give deadlines that are too lenient and you get too much bloat. Somehow Mega Man 2, and it's just luck, right? It's just luck.
It is. I'm actually glad you said this, because Mega Man 2 seems to be the most popular Mega Man game. In my opinion, it's not in the top at all for me. I prefer Mega Man 4, and I actually prefer Mega Man 3. I was not a big fan of Mega Man 2, and even when it came out on the NES Classic as a port, I still was like, You know, when they brought it over, I was like, oh yeah, like I liked this game, but like I kind of wish it was one of the other ones.
Yeah, I mean, I've actually with twitch.tv/RicksterGT been playing through the Mega Man games with my friend Landon. So we're just getting through 6 now. So I have played all the games. I would agree 4 is easily. I think I commented 4 and 5 are easily superior to 2. 3 just kind of bugs me, and part of it is actually just like the boss. I don't like the bosses as much in 3. They're kind of weird.
No, like Snake Man.
We actually Landon and myself did rank the bosses, and I think Snake Man took number 1. So
Snake Man's pretty. What is it?
Snake
Man. Hard Man's in there. I'm trying to remember who the villains are. It's
well, that's the point. I think there's Needle Man. There's a guy with a punching glove. I mean, that's the thing. Is they're
cool though.
Oh wait, no, I'm thinking 5. I don't know. Anyway, 3 aren't my favorite, but I would agree that the games definitely get better kind of as they go on and get more work. But 2 was kind of just the realization of a lot of stuff, and it did add one really cool aspect that also makes this one of the funniest parts of the game, which is they didn't have enough design time because they were doing this on their spare time. And in the first game, Inafune does all 6 characters, and should probably talk more about that in a sec, but he does all 6 characters. And game 2, they're like, you can work on this your spare time. So he doesn't have time to do design work. And so they crowdsource it. They basically release it to the fans and say, submit submissions for the bosses, and we'll pick the best 8 and give you a credit in the credits. Also, though, they are starting production on the game levels before they know the bosses. And so if you go through Mega Man 2 and go, I don't know if all these bosses line up, it's true.
Famously, Heatman's level. Because that
completely
should be
a
sewer man, which is also like a big stretch that they were like, I hope somebody suggests sewer man or whatever, like as they're or whatever they're doing, because they set up a sewer level, which is very fun for me because I'm like, oh, you guys know that's where like shit is, right? Like it's very funny that they would like.
Well, maybe now let's add some story. Maybe Heatman went in there and was like, this is disgusting. I am lighting it all on fire. And that's why it's like all molten lava.
All that sewer gas. You're going to get a Christmas Vacation level explosion.
Oh, okay. So just Heatman just blows up. What is it?
Yeah, you would go down there,
Robotopolis or whatever.
All that methane down there. Yeah. Just have him explode at that point in time. But yeah, that's the one that's very clearly wrong. And then they say, what's the other one? The Flashman, right?
Flashman is clearly supposed to be an ice-based level, and an ice. That's what's funny is that there are a lot of ice bosses. I know 6 has Blizzard Man. I just got through that. 1, of course, had Iceman as well. So it's kind of funny for me that clearly, though, what happened, because they got a ton of submissions. That was one question I had, and myself and Landon looked into, was maybe they didn't get a lot of submissions. These were just the best they could get. And the answer is no. They got thousands of submissions, and whoever was in charge of the boss selection process, a theme that seems to continue through 2, 3, 4, and 5, didn't look at the levels and just went, no, I like this is my favorite. And, you go, we have these levels. Do you want to maybe pick one that matches? And what I will say, I'll jump ahead to 6. 6 does a really good job matching bosses to level. And then it gets to Centaur Man.
Hell yeah.
I want to repeat that. Centaur Man, whose powers are teleportation and time stopping, of course. And that level is like an underwater level with submarines. So they on Mega Man 6, they're like, they do a really good job. They rein it in. They're like, we got to have at least one boss that doesn't match up with the level.
So Centaur Man lives with the Navy, essentially.
Well, he lives underwater, and as you go through the underwater stage, you run into like submarines.
Which means his team is like, he has a team of naval assassins that are on his side.
One thing we've talked about in the game is the little hard hat guys. Something that is amazing is they get costumes in a lot of the games. So they appear.
They're the Goombas. They're the Goombas of
the Goombas of the Mega Man world, and they're awesome. And they get costumes, and it's really fun to think about them coming into the different bosses. Like we're signing up to be a henchman. They're like, can we have costumes? Because there's one point where they're underwater and they have snorkels and they're robots. They don't need to breathe, first off, and they're underwater. But they're like, this is dedication to the craft. We are underwater hard hats. We are wearing a costume. We're not coming here unprepared.
It would be weird to think of them as like snails, that, or like clams that are living in this robotic shell, but they're actually living beings.
Well, that's funny, is right. If you look at Mega Man, he looks living, right? The storyline is he is a robot.
Yeah.
But when the game starts, he's got like flowing hair, and it actually makes sense to the game art design of making him a human with a gun, is that he looks like a human with a gun, but when you read the story and then look, he's got a cannon arm.
Yeah, I realized what I was explaining was the Robotnik aspect of converting living beings into organic beings into.
You're going down the Sonic.
Well, because
like
you'd fight these robot villains, and then when you'd hit them, like a little bunny would bounce away because it's like, oh, you freed me from my techno prison or whatever.
And of course, there are many flying levels. Notoriously, Tails both can fly and has a plane. Because if you can fly, you need a plane.
Hey, I can walk, but I got a car too, bro.
That is a solid retort. I did not see that coming. Game point. But anyway, a lot of the scenes in Sonic are flying, and you hit these robots and you free the creature. It's like you just killed that creature.
Yeah,
like
that rabbit is dead.
That rabbit was in a comfortable robotic shell. It was a superhuman robot, and you just killed it. Thanks.
Yeah, that rabbit leveled up, and you just murdered it. But yeah, so it is very interesting though to see like the history of this game and to see how Capcom, it did very well in Japan, and in America, Mega Man kind of flopped, and they're like, well, we're not gonna do that. It's like, well, it still did well in Japan. Like, are you guys not selling enough? Did you not make enough money? But they still went through with it.
I'm gonna keep this on both podcasts. So as I've mentioned, I do the Box Score Geeks podcast, and then do this as well. A running theme that people should be aware of is do not fall for the myth that successful companies always know what they're doing. And oftentimes it is luck. We're recording this in the midst of Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter. And a bunch of people are rightfully pointing out they're going, everybody's pointing at this man as a success. And that's not a lie. He is. But don't fool yourself into thinking that he is a success because he has great ideas and had a lot of thought into what he was doing, as much as he had a bunch of money and kind of just gambled it. And then, it's kind of like seeing that person at Vegas who, hits it big. He's
a smart investor.
Well, maybe.
Sometimes. I mean, well, he was like, he invested in a lot of things. Like he invested in Tesla. He did not. We need to stop pretending that he like created Tesla. He didn't. He invested in it. He whatever. All right. But you're right. You are right. Like companies, even Capcom, who are, I would say Capcom, historically speaking, is one of the top gaming companies of all time. When you think about like what they've created, when you see, Capcom with Mega Man, then the Street Fighter series, the Resident Evil series, like they're not messing around. They do good work.
Interesting. Their second one is Monster Hunter. Monster Hunter is their second. I'm looking up just their popular franchise, as you mentioned. Resident Evil is up there. Street Fighter is up there. Mega Man is up there, and then Monster Hunter.
Well, Monster Hunter is insanely popular now, whereas Mega Man is like a Ramones shirt. It's like conceptually, old people are still participating, and young people just wear the shirt.
Good God. I'm looking this up. I just briefly looked at the Monster Hunter franchise and how many games. I am old because I've just was completely unaware of this, but yes, you are correct.
Yeah. Yeah, they're big now. Like if a new Mega Man game comes out for like the Xbox, whatever new Xbox version comes out, people are going to be like, maybe I'll download it when I have a free weekend or something. But like if a new Monster Hunter game comes out, people are like, I'm going to lose my shit if I don't get this game right now.
I go play Monster Hunter.
And it's a movie, right? There's a movie for them.
What?
I think Monster Hunter had a movie, whereas Mega Man
hit cartoon show.
It had I don't know if it's a hit cartoon show. It only lasted a year and a half.
Yeah, it's rough. And I do want to shout out to the original Mega Man, just a couple more things which are impressive.
Yes.
I got to give it major props for the double pun, which, as you know, may not have been good in selling it. So, it's dad humor appreciation. Mega Man was called Rockman, and the original thesis design behind Mega Man that persists, a running theme, is the weakness to opponent weapon. So I guess I could have told the story, but you are Mega Man, you're a robot that's trying to fight Dr. Wily. Based on the game, I might talk more about that in a bit. he basically has a collection of robots that are trying to take over the world, and you're taking them over. Each time you defeat an enemy boss, you gain their powers, and more importantly, their powers are useful either in parts of the game, as in like parts of the level to get by it, and or more importantly, beating other bosses in the game. And so some of them are very logical. As an example, usually fire and ice, if there are two of those in the game, one of them is weak to the other. Some of them don't make a ton of sense. You know, in Mega Man 2, as an example, the underwater boss is weak to, you know, a blade. Arguably, most things are weak to a blade, but it's also like Pokemon logic where you're going, the different weakness levels against each other don't always have to line up and make sense. And so it's circular though. So basically each boss is weak to another enemy's weapon.
I have a question.
And it goes in a circle.
Does that mean that Cutman in Mega Man 1 was weak to Mega Man's Mega Buster?
No, Cutman, I forget the last. That's actually the whole point. It goes in a circle, scissors, right? And actually Mega Man 4, you when you start, you have to pick a boss that you do not yet have their weakness for. And so Cutman in Mega Man 1 is the best first choice because he is naturally weakest to the Mega Buster versus all the bosses.
Because Rock beats Scissors.
That probably was intentional. I would agree.
Right? Because if he's Rockman and he's taking out Cutman, who has scissors on his head, it would make sense that the weakness for the Scissor character is Rock.
Yeah. And that's the point. So the joke is rock, paper, scissors, as you're saying. So that's why he's Rockman. And they said, you know what? Rock, paper, scissors, but also music. So Rock has a sister named Roll, who, again, another one of these translations from Japan to the United States are just like, they wrote this rich backstory. Let's throw it out and write our own. And then, of course, it's also pun-based, so it doesn't make sense now that we've changed the name. So to a degree, it makes sense. But, you know, writing out the female character that's only there in the instruction manual, A+ decision, Nintendo America.
In the cartoon, she's there.
Yeah, exactly. So comes back. So it's Rock and Roll, and then later he has a brother that's discovered named Bluesman. So they have two puns: rock, paper, scissors. That's why he's Rockman, and then of course they go the music route as well. Which, you know, it's kind of silly, kitschy, but I get.
And the dog's name,
Rush.
I
don't buy you think Rush is I did not see that in any of my research. You think Rush is named after the semi-popular Canadian rock band?
I mean, if it's a rock and roll themed family, I don't see why not.
I'll have to do so. I did not do any research into that, so we'll future us will determine if Jeff was correct. I'll give that to you. But what I would say about Mega Man 2, because we kind of talked the team went behind it. They were really passionate about it. And I would really argue Mega Man 2, when you're saying it's the most popular, it is the most popular selling. I think it showed what they could do. The one disappointing part is Mega Man 3, they had a bunch of management changes with a bunch of different decisions. And that as a result is really kind of, I think, why the franchise stuck around and did very well. But I think that was the irony and annoyance of the Mega Man franchise as a whole is the management didn't ever really, you know, keep track and manage it properly. And it was kind of like it succeeded in spite of itself because their engineers, their designers were just that passionate about the project.
They were just like, look, man, we're just going to deal with this.
Yeah. And, you know, I certainly, you know, especially in some of your recent episodes, you know, you talking some of your past jobs, can completely understand the frustration of being a creative that's like, hey, I've got this great idea. This would do really well, talking, you know, sideshow collectibles, and then just going, oh, management doesn't want to promote this. I don't know what's going on here, which is kind of a bummer. So, you know, kind of, I would say Mega Man 3 and sideshow on your show that was there are kind of similar. That management was like, this is a good idea. And they're like, are you going to give it what it needs to succeed? And they're like, nah.
I would like to say that Keiji Inafune actually was asked about the Rush name.
Okay, what do we got?
He says, actually, for Rush, there was a game, Rush and Crash, that Capcom had made earlier that I liked a lot. So apparently it's named after this character from Rush and Crash, which was a different Capcom game.
I'll take it. Well, that's a nice little Easter egg. And then Rush, I mean, Rush doesn't show up in this game, but, you know, Mega Man 2 kind of setting the groundwork has the 3 items. And so this is kind of the key. Mega Man is notorious for, as mentioned, you get your enemy's weapons to defeat them, as well as you get these various power-ups depending on if you defeat the right enemy, and these things help you through the game easier. In this one, it's Dr. Light saying, hey, good job beating this guy. I'm going to give you item 1, item 2, item 3. Super descriptive. And Mega Man 3, they fix it going, you're getting Rush Jet, Rush Coil, and I think you have Rush Submarine, which
it's better from a marketing standpoint too. That aspect of it too, where they're like, well, look, hey, we got characters here and we want to sell toys eventually. So
that was a fascinating part of old school Nintendo versus new, was how toyetic they were. And then I wonder how much they dropped the ball, not really capitalizing on a ton. I mean, I know, for instance, Super Mario Brothers 3 was everywhere, Happy Meals. But I remember when like Amiibos came out, those were huge. And the theory behind those, they were these little action figures. I have a bunch behind me, actually. And you could like plug them into whatever game system at the time. I don't know if it was Wii or whatever. But really, like myself and many others were just like, oh my goodness, you're releasing action figures of our favorite characters, more of these. And so like Mega Man was one of the most toyetic ones. And I don't recall if they ever really, if they embraced that enough in say the 80s and 90s. Certainly now, right? Nintendo's everywhere, toys everywhere, stuff like that. Lego sets, those are lots of fun.
I mean, I would like a Lego set of Mega Man.
I mean, does it? It probably exists, right? I don't know. I'll look it up at some point.
Well, you can get you can get a Mega Man 2 shirt at Target.
Yeah,
like they had like the game choice screen at Target. Like that's such an obscure, like not even Mega Man 1. It was like they chose Mega Man 2 specifically for that, and I find that fascinating.
All right, I'm going to mess this up. You have too many Dans on your show, but was it Telfair? How do you say the last name?
Telfer.
He was on your show, and I do know before a convention he was wearing a Mega Man 2 that shirt you're talking about.
Yeah.
So that is I saw it. I was like, that is an awesome shirt. I've got enough at this point, but that would be one fun to pick up.
Yeah, right. I'm fascinated with the fact that this franchise was saved by the people that created it and believed in it against the wishes of the company that actually produced it.
Also the fans. So, I mean, this is kind of a feel-goody story for kind of the community and for people like you, a creator and a fan. Yeah. The backstory of this game is corporate did not give it the support it required or the publicity it required. And they said, I want to do it anyway. And then the fans came up and also helped out and created the most successful Mega Man game in the franchise.
I mean,
that's a feel-good story.
It is. It feels good. It feels good. It feels as good as 3 items that you get in addition to a battling weapon and to metal saw blades to shoot through people or whatever.
Well, let's talk the items, because this is fun. This actually got you to curse at me, which I'm a fan of. This is another part of the game that I am fascinated by, Jeff. I called it Behind the Matrix, aka fuck nerd numbers on the script. So we've talked about in these old games, it came up a little in Zelda, came up a little in Punch-Out, about when you look at really old video games that, are forced to be fully released, right? You're not allowed to patch it like modern days, and are done under crunch time, and are done with, not a lot of resources, that you can end up with glitches in the game. Some of these glitches are just weird. I think you mentioned at one point during Punch-Out, the screen went all blotchy. And I think we've all seen that. There, I don't know the conditions, but there are times in old Nintendo games where just the pixelation gets all screwed up and you're kind of just done. In the arcades, this would happen during like kill screens, like the system itself would run out of memory and just start writing gibberish. On game cartridges, it could happen for any variety of reasons. You're left with pulling the cartridge out and blowing on it. That was your only hope. Some of these glitches are just random. Some of them are predictable and usable. And Mega Man 2 specifically is where it starts, as one of the most popular. And the simplest way I can explain it is, if you look at old Nintendo games, it is really grid-based. And so if you look at Mega Man and Mario, and they look like a human with arms and, not just a square, they are really a square or a rectangle. Mm-hmm. And so all of the math is revolved around rectangles. So, when they're running, etc., you're really doing collision detection on squares, because I'll say this, a graphics project, I got my master's in computer graphics. Basically, it was computer science, but I focus on computer graphics. One of the projects you'll typically do for that is called a ray tracer. And the amount of computation that does, this is to get kind of photorealistic pictures used doing collision detection, acting like you're a camera. is just so vast. Obviously, that's why we have pixelated stuff. Realistic graphics don't come along till forever, and they're really doing math on squares. And so in Mega Man, there is supposed to be...
There couldn't have been a worse thing for you to say to me than it's like, well, the game is basically math on squares, because I'm just that makes me just be like, I know I'm not zoning out, but I want to zone out after you said that.
Oh, you should. Well, I mean, I remember. So this is going to sound weird when we did Zelda 2, the inaugural episode of a show that no longer exists now, right? Because that name's gone.
I changed the name.
Yeah, we did, apparently. Weird, right? But we should just do like old school TV where you replace the actress, like Becky on Roseanne or whatever, and just never mention again. I'm failing that right now, though. But I sent you a video on Zelda with some of the math behind it. It's kind of cool stuff and how it works.
It's not.
And it is awesome, sir. It is awesome.
Is the thing that you got your master's degree in interesting to you specifically? That's so weird.
Oh man, it's funny because I've listened to a bunch of your shows this week. You just have a monstrous row of talking to people from Colorado this week, which is awesome. We're recording this the week of November 1st, by the way. And on the Ugfine show with Kim, you basically keep bringing up your master's degree and how you know stuff.
I don't have a master's degree in biology, but it was my minor. Biology was my minor. So even though I got my degree in history, my degree was in history and education, but I still got a biology minor because I was fascinated by it, and particularly evolutionary biology. So like virology, or virology, I don't know why I said it, virology, virology. So like human physiology, like I'm very fascinated by those aspects of biology. Diseases, like I took courses like diseases in mankind and Darwinian evolution and shit like that. Like I'm fascinated by it. And so to have somebody be like, I don't think that's the case. And I'm like, but it is.
And I know you think listeners, I know you think the Ugfine show, which you better have listened to by now because it'll have been out about a month by the time this comes out. I know you think it's just, witty banter with some of the funniest people out there, but it also talks a lot about biology and stuff like that. So tune in to that nerdy subject, which that was like 80% of that episode, right, Jeff?
That episode, that argument is like when people would say fake news when you would tell them something real, and you're just sitting there just being like, I don't understand why you don't want to believe me on this one. I've studied it a lot, like kind of a lot, but that's fair. But I digress. But
the point being, when we're talking about, you're just really proud of the thing you got in education, and I just happen to have the card up my sleeve of going, Jeff, you were just doing that like 2 hours ago in my time.
And you were like, this is interesting. And I'm like, it's not.
Right.
But it is for you, which I'm so happy for you. I'm happy for you about this, but also at the same time,
how else do you get video games if people don't find this crap interesting?
Well, that's fine. I'm glad that people do it so that we can have these video games. I'm just being like, I don't really care to see how the sausage is made in this one, that aspect of it, which you do. You're really into meat grinding technology of making the sausage. Like that's something really fascinating for you. And for me, I'm like, I just want to eat it on a sandwich. Like my thing is, I want the art of the sandwich. That's
art
the
of the
thing
sandwich.
that I find
that sounds
interesting.
like a good book. Anyway, but by the way, funny, one of my other tangents I'll get on is, in video game history, one of the most famous things is Space Invaders. That's actually a bug. And what happens is, if you recall, Space Invaders is one of the first games to introduce increasing difficulty. So you've got these aliens that are coming down that you're trying to shoot. And as you defeat more aliens, they come down faster. That is not actually intentional. It was a glitch because old hardware, it was so hard to render that basically as you reduce the number of things on the screen, it made it so that they could render them faster. Old things work on like a physical clock, like if you're thinking analog clock. They don't work on some logic that's a little more complicated. We have that modern stuff. And so essentially the clock got less overhaul and could kind of go faster is what happened. And so that's one of the biggest things. Space Invaders got really famous for getting harder and harder and harder, and that was a glitch. And speaking of glitches, Mega Man 2 has one of the most famous ones, which is there's essentially a force field around each of these squares that Mega Man's supposed to walk through. And there is an off by 1 error. So in theory, you are supposed to be, if Mega Man ever ends a render inside of a wall, if that happens, the game would just crash and that would be bad. So the logic's supposed to be, if Mega Man's ever inside of the wall, kick him out. And do some logic. Should you kick him left? Should you kick him right? There is a minor bug in the force field around the wall on the left. So if you are able to quickly get Mega Man stuck in a wall, which you can do with the item. So item 1 lets you move Mega Man in a way that they're not expecting, and Mega Man
little
gets
balloon, right?
Or is
that the wall?
later. This one, it's a little propeller thing that could show up in this one, but it does become a balloon in a later game. That the idea in the Mega Man games of the item that you fall up, and I think there is a balloon anyway. But you're able to get stuck in the wall, and then if you change your direction fast enough, the game thinks it's supposed to eject you to the right. If the math was done correctly, you just wouldn't get in the wall; you get ejected to the left. But you're able to get ejected to the right, and you're able to, it's called zipping, go entirely across.
Yeah, you go through the entire mass until there's a gap, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then also this gets really funnier because we were talking this, and this is fascinating, right, Jeff? In Zelda 2, we were talking this where the rendering of levels is not normal. We think of a room around us as physical space. But when you're thinking a video game, it's more Dungeons and Dragons. Someone's just writing it down and keeping track of it. So you're not physically moving from point A to point B. Someone's doing a math equation and saying, based on the math equation, Jeff was in room A, now he's in room B. So you can combine those two to get all sorts of funny, where you get zipped across the room, you get put in a new room, and you can get put in a place that you're not expected. And if you know the right actions to do, you can like go from room A to room B and then grab onto a ladder in room B. And this is how a lot of the people that do speed runnings get through it really quickly.
Yeah, it's funny too, because the speed runs, like, because I watched some speed run stuff that we've seen before, but these speed runs are still like half-hour runs, basically. That their version of speed is a 30-minute process, which is very interesting because it's so leveled, as opposed to like a Mario speed run where they're like, yeah, they got it done in 2 minutes and 8 seconds or something like that. One of the things I find fascinating is that in a lot of these videos, I forget who it was. It's one of them brings up one of the times I played through, I did it this way. And then another time I did it this other way. And I'm like, dude, how much time do you have to play Mega Man 2?
Well, we were talking that a little pre-show. Summoning Salt, who is a great speedrunner and a great YouTube content creator. Definitely check him out if you haven't.
He did the most recent one we talked about, which was the Punch-Out!
Yeah, he went over Matt Turk, and this recent one he went over Cypher for Mega Man 2. And so something I really appreciate about this guy is when you look at sports, it's so unforgiving. One of the rough parts about sports is you'll get these people that are the greatest, and on track to being the greatest, someone else was really good, but they didn't get that much time in the sun, or just aren't as well remembered. Something that's going around on my Twitter today is Dr. J in the ABA, who was overlooked. Dr. J is one of the greatest basketball players ever, and just really suffers from the fact that basketball in the 70s was at its low point. But if you kind of, rightfully so, he should be kind of ranked top 10. He's probably ranked top 20. He got his accolades. He did really well in the NBA, but
the ABA also was not. It's hard. It's an interesting world. It's like when the NFL and the AFL existed at the same time, and it was just like, these aren't the same though, are they?
But that's the difference. So sorry, Jeff, you stepped on a landmine there, because I've been talking about this all day today. The ABA was basically towards the end just as strong at the NBA at the top. So they had a bunch of teams that were folding, but when the ABA merged with the NBA, the Nuggets were the best team in their division in the NBA. I'm a huge Nuggets fan. Dr. J took away their best hope at a title. Dr. J went on to win MVP.
No.
That's Dikembe Mutombo. I've got a full-size poster in the next room.
I was making a Denver Nuggets joke.
Oh, very good. Yeah. But dang it. Oh man, that's embarrassing. Oh man, off my game, Jeff. Anyway,
you see, because you said the Nuggets, and then I said Dr. J.
You were right. No, you
referenced the Nuggets thing. This is great. Honestly, I'm just gonna keep doing this. Can I tell you something now? You're actually getting a peek at why Adam Todd Brown and I work really well together. Is that my thing is quick reactive references to very well researched information. And that's why, and Adam researches very well, and his comedy is very, very researched and well done and put together and beautifully crafted. Whereas I do my best as a counterpuncher, both as a boxer and in comedy.
And as a researcher, that is the fun part, is where you step on, like, you get all these notes put together and someone's like, hey, no. I'm like, come on.
Well, yeah, it's like you came up with this whole thing and then I just threw you for an entire loop. That's really fun.
And then I have to admit I was wrong. That's the frustrating part. So
honestly, that's the best part for me. It's not just the laughter, but it's the you admitting that you're wrong. There's nothing better for me than for you to be like, you are right. I was wrong. Oh, put that in my veins. That's all I want.
I gave that to you on what the Betelgeuse test.
Oh, the Betel test.
I was like,
no.
I was like, yes, that works. That is correct.
That works conceptually. As for all intents and purposes, that joke is a joke structurally. However, boo this.
Yeah,
man.
it's very, very similar to the charge man at the start of the show. Jeff made a tweet that was a joke. It perfectly lined up. It fit the structure. It fit the tweet structure. It fit the joke structure. It fit the logic structure. So I had to look at it and go, yes, you get full credit for that. I don't want to give you full credit for it.
Yeah.
And we both mentioned we've done teaching in the past. And so, yeah, when you're like grading students and they like argue and eventually you're just like, you're right. I'm going to give you full points. I'm really not happy about it, but I don't have time for this.
No, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't budge. But
you wouldn't? Oh, interesting. As a grader, I was definitely like, if you can argue for it and get it without being a jerk, I will give you the credit as long as there's something there.
I mean, the thing is what I was doing, it was very hard to be able to find different alternate answers to like shit that happened in history. It's very hard to be like,
yeah, that is
what
true.
happened here? And if they said something that wasn't true, it's going to be hard to argue it.
And yeah, and in coding, actually, this leads back to glitches and stuff. It's like, yes, there are ways that you can program the right solution in a way that we're like, oh my God, don't do that. I mean, it works. I have to give you credit for it, but don't do it that way if you go into industry. And then talking about this, the full thing we were talking about is, the speed runs, and something that Summoning Salt does really well is making sure that the people that kind of fall in these gaps of greatest of all time get appreciated. Because like we're talking the Nuggets, and the Nuggets and Dr. J would qualify as.
Can I say something that Summoning Salt does not do well? Pronounce bubble lead.
Dre from the future here. So we're about to step on a very contentious subject. Do you pronounce it bubble lead or bubble lead? Frustrating answer, it's a lot like GIF or GIF. Jeff and I organically describe the logic behind both lines of thinking, and I will note in the Japanese Mega Man anime, there is an instance of Mega Man pronouncing it bubble lead. And in the discussion of speedruns, it's very common to play the Japanese instance of the game, so basically Summoning Salt has a completely rational justification for his pronunciation of bubble lead in his videos. Also, since we do think so highly of Summoning Salt's work, I figured I'd spoil a little later in the podcast where we actually talk about how nitpicky criticisms like this should just be ignored by great creators. Anyway, enjoy.
He calls it bubble lead during the entire thing. And I'm just sitting there and I'm just losing my mind because I'm like, it's bubble lead, isn't it? Like it's lead. It's a heavy thing because it's a bubble, but instead of going up, it goes down. So that makes me lead to believe that it is a bubble that is made of lead and will therefore cause damage. There's no reason.
I could see it both ways because it is the bubble. You're saying it's the bubble lead, and you're saying you could say the bubble lead.
He says the bubble lead,
but I could see it being called that because it like goes in a direction, right? It like leads.
I mean, sure, but no, like it's lead. It's you're bashing somebody with lead. And that's like, I mean, I know, I'll add this. Neither of these are good names, but the reason because bubbles naturally would go up, especially in the water. So because they go down, it's really because they're made of lead as opposed to just actual bubbles, which is air and air.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. And like I was saying, even from the lead perspective, I guess you're right. Like a bubble, regardless of its content, would basically go in a direction because of the air inside of it and the difference between, the gas outside. So I'll give it to you. And I mean, this is a funny one. And I've got to imagine it hurts you on a spoken forum. And this has happened to you and other people you say the word incorrectly and you don't know the right way to say it. And especially if it's a podcast like about a person and you get the name wrong and you do it 10 times during the episode and it gets released. And someone's like, hey, that was a great episode. By the way,
yeah, and the poor Summoning Salt did a 1 hour and 28-minute video about this, and some dipshit podcaster shows up and is like, "It's actually bubble lead, not bubble lead." And this guy's like, "I did so much work to make this video, and you just have to nitpick," and I do because it makes me feel superior.
Well, to be fair, what you're doing is on your turf. You're criticizing something else, which is more than fair. You're not being that person that goes into their comment section and is very rude or does it repeatedly. So
no, I didn't put it in the comment section where they would see it. Instead, I cowardly hid behind my own podcast where I could tear him apart without him getting an opportunity to respond.
Anyway, Summoning Salt has done a couple of these of kind of appreciating people that were, the first place for only for a little bit. So the Mega Man speed run is about Cypher. The reason I really liked it is it was showing the culmination of all of these glitches working together. The last one that I did want to, give a niceness to, I believe it's Displaced Gamers. This is someone I kind of was mentioning at the start. When I gave you Zelda, Jeff, you were like, this is all Greek to me. And when Zelda versus Mega Man 2, if that was making you zone out, the Zelda one, the Mega Man 2 one is just, you're like, this isn't really my thing. I'm like, well, I'm going to give that to you times 100. So Displaced Gamer goes really in depth on the code on Mega Man 2. It is fascinating stuff, Jeff, if you're into code.
Which I am. The best part of this show for me is when we start talking about code, because I understand all of it. It all makes sense to me. It's all fun and interesting to me. It's so funny. Like, I'm so simple to boil down. I've had these conversations with people before where I'm like, look, I'm so easy to crack and I'm so easy to read that it blows my mind when people can't. And I look at, and like, when I trace back like my history of things and how non-technical I am and how I'm very much more of the artsy kind of style of person. And when you think about it, the toys I grew up with, I did not play with Transformers. I hated them. I don't do Legos. Like, I hate any technical toy as a kid, like Legos, building shit. My brother, before Lego even had the Star Wars license, my brother was making working X-Wings with Lego Technics. He made a red X-Wing that had working S-foils in it. Like, he could do that, like the engineering aspect. Transformers, he could like, I was like a G.I. Joe, He-Man, like, give me the toy and I will create the story. I don't need to do the technical aspect of it. So when we look at games like this, for me, the speed runs are the Legos of that, where I get why some people are fascinated by it. But for me, I just want to look at the overall art of the piece.
Well, it's funny. I'm going to be curious if you have a similar challenge. So you've had two challenges, I would say, for Zelda 2 and Punch-Out, our last two shows. So in Zelda 2, you kind of mentioned, still blows my mind, Jeff, that you were able to just beat that game, essentially doing what would be known in the computer science world is depth first search. So good work.
Just walking around.
Yeah, you basically depth first search is like, go as far as you can. When you hit a wall, you backtrack a little, you go as far as you can. It's just like that's what you're willing to do. Whereas, like, there are clever algorithms where you try and figure out the quickest way through it. And then on Punch-Out, you actually had something very similar. You said you and your brother's challenge was not a speed run. So when I was like, hey, here's some speed run videos, I finally beat Mike Tyson. Here were the tricks to figure out how to beat it. And you said, no, we're not interested in beating them as quickly as possible. We're interested in, can you go through the game without getting a hit landed on you? Which I'll say canonically was the most correct for Punch-Out, because if that guy gets a hit on him, he should be going down against any of those boxers.
There's something to be said about the style versus the, because it's speed or it's style, I guess, would be the two things. And we preferred that style, the flawlessness of it. Whereas some people are like, well, you have to take this hit in order to cause this thing to happen. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. I want a perfect game. So speedruns never really, but I also mentioned this in our first episode. I used to speedrun in college. We used to speedrun Super Mario Brothers. And it was just me and my friends just seeing how fast we could go, but we never glitched. So we would do the game, and it was like an unimpressive number, like 6 minutes and 8 seconds or something, where we would get straight through, start to finish, like including the little cut scenes and things. I liked that, but I didn't like it once I started seeing people talking about breaking the code. Like, I actually don't like that aspect of it. I think it removes me from the narrative of the story.
There's something very writery about that. So, kind of the writer thing is you have these, 3-act structures, et cetera, or rules of whatever, Chekhov's gun. So Tom and Dave do this a lot, where it's kind of like, here is the story. Here are the rules that they have given us. they wanted to, the screenwriters wanted to fuck around, and that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But they fucked around in such a way that it broke it. It was like, this is stupid.
Yeah.
And a game they will often usually is go, how could I fuck around in this universe, following the rules of this universe, and still make it messed up? And it sounds like you're kind of doing that as a narrative. You're going, you've given me a rule. You've given me a world in Mario. You've given me warps. Warps are canonical. They're in the game. How can I exploit the warps to beat this game as fastly as possible?
Yeah, not becoming a ghost to get sucked through bricks.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm telling you, the creator of this game made a mistake. And so you are allowed to, Super Mario Brothers 3 is one of the weirdest. I don't know if we'll get to that ever. We'll see. But some of the code breaking there, and we're talking speed runs, is ridiculous, where you are literally in your actions in the game rewriting the world so that you can get through it in a different way.
Yeah, see, I'm not in the Matrix. Like, I'm not, I like the idea of playing the story optimally through the storyline that's intended. And that is, I guess, in a way, respecting the art as opposed to purposefully respecting via disrespecting the code or the programming. And I think that is also very clear as to how you and I view these things. We have a very oil and vinegar thing, which is we mix very well together on a salad, for example, but that we're not the same thing. Like we're very different. Like, I'm the oil that wants it to be within the rule structure of this is it. And you are the vinegar that is like, I like exploring these different aspects of what can be broken to it. They don't go together. Like, if you put them in the bottle, they never mix. But when you combine the two flavors together, it creates something really great.
That's another one of, since as a nerd, you don't normally get to get called kind of like, or me, don't get to call like the interesting part. I will take that metaphor. It's another one of those. I'll give you full
equally
credit.
Interesting. It's not, because here's the thing. Here's what I feel. If I was just doing the story, the flourishing art aspect of this thing, or if you were doing just here's the code and why it's interesting, you're going to lose some of that audience. In the same way that when I'm watching these speedrun things or these code breaking things, I'm not interested that much. It's not fun for me. And some people would be like, I want to know more about the tech, so they wouldn't be as interested in me. But when we mix that two together, I think it works really well. And that seems to be what the comments are saying. And feel free to discuss this in the comments. But the comments seem to think that this is a really good synthesis of these two things.
I will say this show is for the moment. It's at that perfect size where it's good for my ego. I know you've seen this as a creator, and I've seen this as well, where you make something, gets positive reception, you feel great. And as soon as it gets just a little big enough, that's when you get some of those. That's when you get the Jeff comments on like, it's pronounced lead, not lead.
What I say to people like that?
You get that as a comment. You get that as a comment, and you get that as a comment 1 minute after you post it, and you get it, by the person who just comes back and you're like, you worked in a comic book store, so same idea where you're like, why do you keep coming here? You just seem to want to complain. I don't need you around.
I got a message from somebody recently that said, I'm so goddamn tired of podcasts. This is somebody that I know that's a podcaster, because, hi, we know each other. And I wrote, yeah, is it because we're in a Sisyphean job with no end in sight? And the reply was, yes, that and the commentators. These people used to be fun, and now they just listen until they can nitpick something. I then went to that person's podcast page and found a comment that was incredibly complimentary about somebody who was going through a tragedy, and this was something that saved them and like made them feel good in a very difficult time. And I said, these are the comments that you should be focusing on, not the nitpickers, because those people don't matter. I hate to say it, but nitpickers don't matter in the long run.
I'm a huge fan of behavioral economics, which is really just rebranded psychology. It's really nice when men come into a field that's primarily women driven. They're like, we got to rebrand it. We got to rename it. But basically how we respond to positive versus negative. And we're just broken as machines. If you look as humans as machines, which of course I do, Jeff, because that's what I do.
Yeah. Because you're the numbers part of this.
I am the numbers part. We're just not actually built for receiving the same. If you feed the same information in a positive stream and a negative stream, right? So positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement. We're not built to handle negative reinforcement. And kind of the apocryphal kind of scientific one is like 4-to-1. Because like really the strength of the positive needs to outweigh the strength of the negative by, 4 times. And so that's really remarkable, is that if you have if two people comment, one person says, this was the best thing ever, this made my day, this was amazing. And you have one person that says, I didn't really like it. The unfortunate reality is the negative one is going to land harder than the positive one, even though if you did the math thing, put them in a spreadsheet and wrote them up, you'd be like, oh yeah, you're plus 0.1, right?
That's also how people view like work output is another example of that. I remember being introduced to the concept of one oh shit undoes 1,000 attaboys, which was you can succeed 1,000 times, but if you fuck up one time, sometimes that's all your boss is going to talk to you about or want to discuss. They'll never talk about all the successes that you've done. They're only going to talk about the negative aspect. It is very funny too. The more we have sort of not diluted, I don't know if it's, the more we have shaped this show. The nerd name, I actually prefer more to Shut Up Nerd, because I think you and I are two very different styles of nerd. And it's sort of that oil and vinegar aspect that I said, whereas people ask me a lot. They're like, oh, you're a nerd. Can you fix my computer? And I was like, and I always say, no, I'm not a useful nerd. I'm a fiction nerd. We're the useless kind. And that really is like, when you get commentators, and I've had this discussion with like friends of mine, like Coy Jandreau, for example, another Boston nerd pundit with a boxing background. And he's hosted panels in Hall H and stuff like that. And he's a good friend of mine. And I talked about it. I said, this is legit like one of the only jobs that we can have as the kind of nerd we are. We can either write and create, or we can commentate, which are pretty much there. Whereas you have a usefulness to your nerdiness. Your nerdiness pays your bills, doesn't it?
It does. Well, I mean, so does yours. But it gets so arbitrary.
Not as much.
Well, but I mean, that's the other thing is I went into computer science. This is kind of funny. When we talk about the speedrunning video, I'll kind of, end that off. But just the point is not Matt Turk, Summoning Salt gives highlights to people that were big in the community that may not be the number ones. And it's very nice. It is like going through the ABA. And one of the people he goes over, this guy named Cypher, who is just this guy that is obsessed with Mega Man 2. And
after he got so plugged back into the Matrix.
I feel so bad for the dude, because he is this guy that will break the world record and get to enjoy it for a minute, because it almost seems like as soon as he figures out the trick, the community finds it. And I think there's also probably some incentive, right? If you're the top dog, maybe you don't want to go after the record if just somebody random has it with like an insanely good run. But when the top dog gets it, you're like, I want to compete. So it is just a rough thing where this person, I think the thing is he's held the Mega Man 2 speedrunning record like 5 or 6 times and held it for like a combined total of 6 months, despite the fact that at times this was one of the most like, this isn't going to be broken records at various times in its history. And he is just this guy that is obsessed with Mega Man 2. And we were talking a little, you watch this and you go, is that what you should be spending your time? And it is always a hard question for creatives and people doing what they love. The easy answer, by the way, to any of that, whenever anybody's like, well, should you be spending this much money? Should you be spending this much time? As long as it is not destructive, is usually the takeaway. If you're spending beyond your means, like if you're $20,000 in debt because of all the books and action figures behind you, that's a problem. If you're paying your bills and you want to spend some of your disposable income on an awesome Skeletor bobblehead, go for it, right? And the same thing, if the Cypher guy, if this is what he's doing for fun and, does that, makes sense, goes for it. I was that way with computer programming in high school. It was completely arbitrary. In high school, I used to ditch other classes. I got a D in high school in German because I would ditch that to go code. That Space Invaders thing I was talking about was extra credit. It wasn't required. I was doing that for fun. One of my favorite jokes that is known in the family that's laughed at is, in college, I got a C in human sexuality and health. That was a required, biology, whatever class to fill some credit, because I would ditch that class to go code, right?
There's nothing funnier than to ditch a human sexuality course to go play on your computer. Like that's such a stereotypical nerd thing.
Yep.
That sounds like something you just told me a throwaway joke from Big Bang Theory.
Exactly.
where it's just like,
except a good joke,
where it's just like, well, Sheldon, don't you understand this? Why, no, as a matter of fact, when there was sexuality class, I would actually go and code, and everyone, and then that laugh track would go over. But that's a thing you did.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, it gets a good laugh, self-deprecating, fun. Exactly. But I'll just say it's arbitrary, right? It was just something that I was passionate about. And it just, and I think anybody that is successful at anything, and this includes like in the entertainment field, should be cognizant of that, is that there was some combination of environment and your interest in something that got you to success. It might have been because you worked really hard, but a lot of it is just environment based. So when we're talking like, oh, your nerd skill is useful, it's like in 2000, when I was studying this, it looked like the bubble was going to burst. This was when the dot-com bubble was bursting. People were fleeing the computer science field. It's arbitrary.
But I don't think anybody, no, okay, but here's the thing is that people might have been leaving, but there's no pretending that computers weren't going to be the future. Like, computers were always known to be the wave of the future at this point in time. Like, I get very, as the nerd type I am, I get very cautious about being like obvious after the fact.
Well,
yeah, but not even, because the when the word processor was created and it destroyed the typewriter, and they were like, here's why. And they were like, and this is going to continue to happen. I don't think anybody, unless somebody was like trying to mine gold, like during the .com phase, which is very true, I don't think anybody was thinking like, well, the internet's going to fail or something like that. Like, people knew, it's just that there was a time where one of the aspects of it was wrong. And so the .com boom became like a ghost town, if I'm using the gold mine analogy the same way, where it's this town that used to do well, and then didn't. But that doesn't mean that gold isn't a thing anymore, Do
you have anything else to add on Mega Man? Because I basically am considering we're kind of on the button of that. I think I'd hit all the points I had in the script.
One of the things that I think we should talk about too is, and one of the things that I'm interested in is the whatchamacallit, the villains and like the characters, because we didn't really talk that much about like Dr. Light, for example, who looks like Santa. The creator of Mega Man looks like Santa.
When we're talking personalities, it's funny. I got through all this. I'm like, yeah, let's not talk this. I put the story in the script, by the way, too. Like, yeah, let's talk about the mechanics and this, not the story. But actually, so yeah, Dr. Light is based on Santa. Dr. Wily is based on Dr. Einstein.
Which is weird because he looked like Einstein. And as a kid, I recognized that. But I'm like, why is this the bad guy?
He in real life, if you think about it, Einstein helped make the atomic bomb. And I'm going to shout out Adam Todd Brown, one of your co-hosts on a lot of shows. Great Substack. Subscribe to Adam Todd Brown Substack if you don't. And were you on the episode where he talked about, has the United States always been fascist? I think
yes,
you might have. Yeah,
that was us and Valerie Tossi.
Awesome. So don't have time to talk about all the great parts about that episode. But anyway, yeah, the point being, like, the United States is like, Albert Einstein, was he really the villain? It's like, he helped build one of the most destructive bombs in the history of the world. Like, but the United States is the good guys. And Adam Todd Brown in the episode was like, are we?
See, this is another one of those after the fact situations where it's like the atomic bomb, we look at it now and we're like, man, that was a huge fucking problem. But back then it was like, well, how do we fucking put an end to this war without losing more American lives? I understand. I need people to understand that I understand that there are political and fascist implications to the fact that you are building any kind of weapon to end a war. I understand that. That being said, Japan was fighting a war where they were like pretty much deciding they weren't going to give up. And the bomb is what made them do it. It's evil and ugly and awful, and I recognize that, but you also got to know, like, it was a war. And it was awful and bloody and violent. And we can Monday morning quarterback the nuclear proliferation as being such a horrible and awful thing. But at the time, they were just like, we got to put an end to this fucking war. I don't know why I did this in a Mega Man thing, but like I've never,
as Jeff is well known for, you will never do a history podcast, but talking about the character design. So that's Dr. Light and Wily. That makes sense, just more for the image thing. And I would say from a story perspective, Mega Man
also, I guess it's Japanese. Like, in Japan designed it. Oh, so like, yeah, they're like, yeah, this guy dropped a fucking bomb on us. Fuck this guy. Okay, yeah, no, hell yeah. I rescind everything I said. Yeah, he's a huge villain in them.
All right, never got it. And then what I'll say is the story's kind of weak, and then of course did you have specifics on design you wanted to discuss on the characters?
So I just want to discuss it because one of the things that we forgot to do is talk about sort of the visual and artistic building blocks of this game, which is you have Dr. Light and you have Dr. Wily, two opposing doctors going up against each other. Dr. Wily going to be a considerable nemesis up until, I mean, including part 4, where we also get Dr. Cossack, which is not a history podcast, but you can figure that one out by Googling that word. And so, but you get these designs that we get from the characters that the people suggested. And so we have Metal Man, Air Man, Bubble Man, who's water-based, Quick Man, he's fast, Crash Man, who is essentially just a bomber. Crash Man's whole thing is just making shit explode. Flash Man, who actually stops time, which is a very interesting, probably the most interesting villain battle, in my opinion, is the guy that stops time to shoot the shit out of you.
Ironically, he's one of the easiest if you just jump up and down and do that. So that's kind of funny. But
yeah, but at the same time, like, he's very interesting. And also you can just shoot the metal blade right through him.
Yeah, metal blade is broken in this game.
That Heat Man and Wood Man. And like, you do have the rock, paper, scissor aspect of it as well. And it gets in there and you have all these characters. And then you have in the Wily Castle, you have more bosses, including some very, very incredible throwaway designs. For example, the Mecha Dragon, which I think a lot, like, it's one of the most common screens of Mega Man 2 is Mega Man on a block shooting at the Mecha Dragon.
And that level is awesome and terrifying. So for most of Mega Man, it's a side scroller, and you actually, in many levels, have a little bit of control, as in with like ladders, you're allowed to backtrack. And with most levels, you can backtrack some. So some levels, they lock you into a screen. You can only go back so far, but you're allowed to go forward and backward. First part of the game, this is the only time it happens. You go into the dragon stage, you're walking along, it's a normal looking stage. Suddenly you're on rails, it's pushing you along. And if you're not fast, if you don't start moving, this dragon comes up behind you and kills you in one shot. And so you've got to jump really fast as this huge freaking dragon is following you.
Yeah.
And then you get to the end, and the annoying nerd part is, right, you can kill him easily. If you jump to the top brick and use boomerangs and just spam, you're guaranteed to kill him and you can't die, because even if he hits you, you fall back. But it's an amazing concept, an amazing design, kind of very awesome, almost horror-y, because it comes out of horror-y. Sorry, that sounded weird if I didn't say it that way. Comes out of nowhere, an amazing design. Technically, sorry, Jeff, because I know, as we've discussed multiple times already, this is the thing you like.
It's okay.
It's a trick, and this is actually awesome. The reason that screen moves and the reason that dragon looks so big is you were only able to render villains so big on Nintendo. And so that's actually the background. And so the trick is, if you look at the dragon, the face animates, but the back, the body does not. And that's because the body is actually the background. But it was incredibly creative of the design squad to go, how can we, we can only have villains that are so big, only have enemies that are so big. How could we have one that takes up the whole screen? And that became commonplace. That happens multiple times in the Mega Man games, and they are very creative about it.
Well, we see it again because we have and I did look up the names of all of the Wily.
There's so many, man. It's so hard to remember.
Pico Pico Kun, which is the second enemy, which is this like kind of, I don't know, it's like a block. It's like a system of blocks that smash.
Oh yeah, like the blocks that try and crush you. Yep.
Yeah, it's weird. But then you get the Guts tank, which is a revisit of Guts Man from Mega Man 1, but as a tank. Now, Guts Man is going to become one of those sort of like the King Hippo of the Mega Man world, where like his design is so cool, and he was basically like an ape design. And so we see the Guts tank, which is Guts Man but as a tank, so we get to revisit that character. Then we have the most evil villain or sort of boss, which is the Boo Beam Trap, which is set up where you can only use the Crash Bomber, which costs a lot.
It is the worst. That I hate that level. Horrible level design. You
only have 7 shots, and you have to get through. You have to get through those stupid things.
And one's a decoy,
some of them are
so
decoys,
you can.
Yeah. So it's kind of like a maze a little bit that you have to do in there. Then you have the boss rematches, where you get to find out that Metal Man's main weakness is Metal Man. his saw blades. Then you get sort of what was it, the Wily floating around, and then you have like Wily in his like little ship,
Yeah,
and
like a spaceship. Yeah,
what might be considered, is this the worst final boss of an entire? Is this the worst boss?
Worst how?
The alien, like the alien aspect
So
of Dr. Wily.
the gotcha of the alien is that it's just a hologram that Dr. Wily's, incepted you. You're in a room that's really virtual reality. You think you're fighting an alien. You're fighting a hologram when you actually what's Mysterio? Mysterio would be more of the thing.
Yeah.
This actually happens in like the Spider-Man universe. Is like you're stuck in an illusion, break the illusion, and the illusion he's used as an alien does not make a lot of sense. And I kind of mentioned this similar to the Shadow Link. What bugged me is this was as far as I got as a kid. The alien is annoying in that it is only weak to the bubble lead.
You fucker.
There's only weak to the bubble lead. You have to basically hug him to get it because the bubble will fall immediately. So the alien never touches the ground, but he does just go in a figure eight. So it's a very predictable pattern, and it's very frustrating to someone like me who is pattern driven. Like you come back to him as an adult and you go, kid me, he was just going in a figure eight. This was easy. But as a kid, I never figured that out. And he always just,
he's also a 2-hit killer. If he hits you twice, you die. And if you hit him with anything other than the bubble lead, you refill his entire, his life force. And then it shows up, he's like, I'm kidding, I'm not an alien. It really does. Everything after the original 8 robots does seem a little bit, and like maybe the Mecha Dragon thing, but it does seem rushed.
Right? 100%
like they're trying to get that out, where you're sitting there and you're like, this is the end, really? Like it's like playing a very difficult game, and then at the end it's just like a quick cutscene of like, famously the ending of Alien 3 for the Sega Genesis. I remember like working my ass off, finally getting there, and they're just like, the end. And I'm just like,
yeah, it's over.
Do that. That's really what I got out of this. Okay.
Although, I mean, that's funny. Like in hindsight now, after the fact, so many video games from our era, you're just like, oh, it wasn't about the story. It was about the gameplay, or things were rushed. So it's kind of normal. But it is, from a narrative perspective, you're right, where that does get very interesting. And definitely the later boss fights, the Wily, do seem tacked on to just elongate the length of the game. That used to be a thing in console games, is they would go, people aren't going to want to buy this if it only takes them 15 minutes. So we got to stretch it out, not realizing that just makes a worse experience. One of the most notorious was Halo, where you just have to go all the way back to where you just came through, and people complain about it.
So I would also like to add too, because I like to do, I'm much more of the visual and artistic version of interpretation of this game. The Mega Man 2 American box art that we always talk about, you have Mega Man with a gun, and then you have Quick Man getting out of the way, and then it looks like Crash Man. And
it is. Oh, is Crash Man in that scene? Have I never noticed this?
Quick Man is avoiding the shot, and Crash Man and like Dr. Light for some reason is hiding behind Crash Man, pointing at Mega Man. It's supposed to be Dr. Wily, and yet it's Dr. Light that is looking at him, and it's weird, right? The Japanese box art version is much more of just like a manga. It's a manga cover. It's just manga. That's all it is. It's a very manga style. Oh, here's Rockman, and then here are the characters that are going after behind him. But one of the things that I found that is very interesting, and I forgot to put it into the notes, and I'm really looking forward to, is the European box art, which looks insane. It looks like a weird high fantasy. If you look up Mega Man 2,
what in the world is this?
Art, and then there also happens to be a German box art version as well, which sort of seems like a weird smattering of different things into it. Like he's on the item 2 on the cover, and Dr. Wily looks like Heihachi Mishima, behind
This
him.
one's awesome. I'm looking at the one you're talking about.
German, and then there's like just like the mecha dragon, and then like a small guts tank. It's very clip art thrown together, but it is weird. But the European version, in my opinion, is one of the coolest and weirdest looking things.
I will give that to you. That does look, and it has the other ones realize the dragon. The one last kind of weird throwaway kind of throughput of Mega Man that's very interesting is with how hodgepodge they are. Is there are a lot of interesting ideas and bosses that are like one-offs in these games, right? There'll be a really cool dynamic at a level. You're like, that was an awesome dynamic, like the rising water levels or something. Then it only shows up in one level in the game. You're like, you could have made a game around that dynamic. And Mega Man seems very much almost like sketch pads. They're like, I had an idea, I coded it up. There's not a game it can go into at the moment. We need to fill Mega Man by 5 minutes throughout the Mega Man game. And so it's kind of a throughput for the game.
I think the biggest example of that might be Quickman's instant light beam murders that they have, where you're going through the level and it's like and it goes, and like you have to use you don't have to, but the flash freeze is like the only thing you can really use if you want to comfortably get through that part. Or else
and then they kind of justify that being why that's Quickman's weakness. So
yeah, and that makes sense too, because Quickman, it's like putting freezing the flash in time, like that must seem like an eternity, and the pain that must come through that would be wild.
Well, Jeff, unfortunately, I have to give us the 60-second warning if there's anything else you want to end on Mega Man, because I do have a hard stop today, and then I'll lead us to a couple of lead out stuff.
I mean, we're good. I mean, Mega Man 2 is one of those games. It's not my favorite of the Mega Man franchise, but I do recognize that it is the most popular of the Mega Man franchise, and it did give us what would eventually become my favorites. So I'm very glad we got to do this.
I recognize it in hindsight as like, this is where the first ideas are introduced, so I can see the nostalgia working, and then recognizing that it was done much better in future games. Mega Man 6 is, if you're going to play one Mega Man game, just play 6. 6 is where they figured everything out. It's very good.
I really I love 4.
4 is really good as well.
Yeah. Well, that being said, it does it for the November episode of Nerd. That's us. We're nerds. Dre, what do you got going on?
All right. Well, the common plugs, I podcast at the Box Score Geek Show, and you can find that at boxscoregeeks.com and anywhere podcasts are found. Occasionally do streaming, twitch.tv/RicksterGT. Unfortunately, we have to take tonight off. He is sick. Of course, do this, Jeff. It is really bloating my ego to hear you promote this on all of your other shows, because you do like 20 in a month. Now, Jeff, though, I do actually want to end this episode off on a few things. Do have to give a huge shout out to the great cover art that was done last, and we can talk more, but Sidekick 42 did a NES homage, and we were just talking box art cover, so I definitely enjoyed that. Didn't want to make it through the show without giving some direct homage to that. And then also wanted to talk the future, which is what we're going to do for December. I had suggested doing the He-Man Christmas special. You had suggested maybe doing the Muppets Christmas special from 1987, not the Michael Caine one. I think that'd be fun, but I also think that's just good. I think that's the problem, is I think that would kind of be a boring episode.
Family, the Muppet Christmas Carol, I think, is too good of a Christmas Carol. It's just a good movie.
Yeah, we just be like, this was really, you might be able to squeeze out some Batman jokes, but I mean, that's more of a you and Tom thing with Michael Caine, but that's about all you got.
Okay. I forgot that you had suggested the He-Man Christmas special, which is perfectly fine. It's great and I love it. Muppet Family Christmas is my favorite Christmas special of all time. I watch it every year. It's available for free on YouTube. But then on top of that, it's so weird because it's the synthesis of 3 different properties that were technically owned by different production companies. Even though Henson created all 3 of them, because it's the mix of Muppets, Fraggles, and Sesame Street all together. And it's just, I just really like it. So I like the history behind it and why it hasn't been available on DVD and shit like that. So I did bring that. So yeah, we do have 2 different versions we could do of this.
And I'm debating if I'll do a poll. We might. You'll see what future. The good news is we record this ahead of time, and it comes about a month later. So you'll see what I've decided by then. So we might do a poll. We'll probably do one of those 2 things. The outro that I do with the Dragon Ball Z movie, you'll hear that. But yeah, that's all I got, Jeff.
Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, for me, of course, if you're listening to this, then I'm assuming that you listen to Jeff Has Cool Friends. If you don't, you should. If you're listening to this for free, head on over to patreon.com/JeffMay, JEFFMAY, for access to that. Plus Ugh Fine, my monthly show with Kim Crawl. And I got lots of other stuff, happening on there coming. I try to get as much stuff as I can in there. It's just tough because I'm also on Tom and Jeff Watch Batman on the Gamefully Unemployed Network. So you can check that out, as well as Unpopular Opinion and You Don't Even Like Sports, a sports podcast for people who don't like sports. That's you, probably, if you're listening to a show called Nerd. But you'd really like You Don't Even Like Sports. It's a great game. It's a great show, excuse me. And those are both available on the Unpops Network. If you want to see me live, don't forget to hit up Mint on Card the second Friday of every month at Blast from the Past on Magnolia in beautiful Burbank, California. So that means our next show is going to be December 9th. If you are listening.
So luckily this should be released so that actually is useful.
Yeah, that's, you see why I didn't say the
last one, the one in the past.
The show's being released after that. I know what I have dates ready to go. December 9th, check that. And of course, if you want to follow me on social media, I'm at Hey There Jeffro. So do that.
Hey, when's F and Nerd coming?
So we have recorded 3 episodes. It's up to Stefan Nilsson when we release it. I believe he's going to be releasing it under his own sort of tentpole experience. So I don't know. And I don't care. I mean, I do care, obviously, but like whenever he wants to release it, that's fine. I think he wants to get a few episodes in the can and ready to go. But we have 3 killer episodes already in the can, and I'm very excited.
You keep talking about them on your other podcasts, and I'm like, stupid episode 1 me was like, don't bug creators about taking their time for stuff. And then if you didn't keep making effing Nerd cooler sounding every time you bring it up, I wouldn't be doing this, Jeff.
The guests on that show, the guests that we're getting on that show are going to make you guys shit. I'm so excited about it. But
you should be listening to all of Jeff's other stuff that he just plugged, so you can hear, because you've said it. They're like Easter eggs at the end of outros, but you have said them. So
yeah. I mean, so that being said, you got a kid to go get. So
oh yeah, I do.
So let's finish this. Dre, great. I'm going to see you in December. We're going to talk some seasonal shit.
All right. Well, usually I think the way you end this out is just saying bye. And I say bye.
Bye.
Bye. Next month on Nerd, we put Jeff's fate in your hands. Will the host discuss Jeff's favorite Christmas special, done by one of the most creative people ever in the 1987 Muppets Christmas special? Or will we force Jeff to borrow the He-Man Christmas special from Eric Barnes and be tortured by bad 1980s animation? His fate is in your hands. See you next time.